Welcome back from all of the excitement. We have Studio 255 with Brett Glass and the City of Laramie City Council agenda preview this week on 93.5 FM, your home for the holidays. Brett Glass.
Good morning, Eric, and good morning, Laramie. Here is your preview of the agenda for the City Council work session, which will take place this coming Tuesday, December 9th, in the City Council chambers at City Hall, 406 Ivinson Avenue. I have here the agenda that's online. You can find this online if you go to cityoflaramie.org/agenda center and scroll down to the City Council meetings and click on the link for that meeting. The agenda says pre-council meeting begins at 6:15 p.m. The meeting itself begins at 6 p.m. This is obviously a typo. They do not have a pre-council meeting when they do not actually have a council meeting, and this is a work session. So what they will have actually is a work session where they will take public comment on non-agenda items they're not discussing that night, and then they will go on to the regular agenda, which consists of 2 work sessions. And, well, the first work session is called Considering Revisions to the Storm Surface Water Utility Ordinance, which is a hot topic in Laramie. Everyone's concerned about being taxed a lot for stormwater projects of various kinds. But unfortunately, if you take a look at the file name for the for this item, there's a PDF there, and it says December 9th stormwater.nothingtoreport.pdf. And sure enough, there's nothing to report. Ever since the City Council meeting paused activity with regard to the stormwater storm and surface water utility, I guess nothing has been done because the staff has nothing to report. And that's sort of a shame because things were kind of left hanging after the last work session. At the last work session, the staff discussed what would happen if there were a cap on the stormwater tax. In other words, if the large landowners weren't forced to pay proportional to the amount of land that they had or the amount of land they had that wasn't permeable. That's all that was discussed at that previous work session, and the council didn't discuss other possibilities for improving the project or the charges for it. In particular, council discussed only reducing the amount of money that went to capital expenses, not to the ongoing expenses. Those were still $700,000 a year. They didn't talk about reducing that. They didn't talk about doing anything for customers at the low end of the spectrum, people who didn't own a tremendous amount of land. Instead, they talked about having a cap for the big landowners. They didn't talk about having a deductible.
Did they discuss changing the $1.67 per 500 units?
That's the other thing they didn't talk about. They didn't talk about what happens if you change the rate per unit. Now, if you imagine a graph where you have one axis the amount of land you have that is impermeable and your tax on the on the y-axis, there's a lot of ways to draw that curve. You can have it not start right at the origin. You can have it start a little bit farther out. In other words, you can have a deductible. You can have the curve be a little flatter so that it doesn't increase so dramatically. And of course, you can have a cutoff where it just goes flat. And, well, only one possible change to that graph was discussed, and the rest wasn't discussed. And I think that should have been scheduled to be discussed during this follow-on meeting.
How much did we invest as a City of Laramie public in the impervious surface plan being that overlay being done for the City of Laramie? How much did we invest collectively through that
We spent millions on that, literally.
At least 500,000 to one company, right?
I believe that we spent between $1 and $2 million on, although I don't have the number right in front of me. It's quite a lot.
And we have an imperfect system after a million.
That's right. And it's not even clear that, permeability of your particular area, well, just because, for example, it's bare dirt doesn't mean that it doesn't absorb water. Also, permeability doesn't necessarily have to do with how much water you get or receive in a storm, because if you have low-lying land, then it's going to get the water. It's going to become a sink for stormwater, permeable or not. But that's the only
Gravity
criteria.
works.
The only criterion they used for what your tax was going to be was this almost arbitrary permeability number. And
So it's easy. It's easy to poke. It's easy to poke holes in the problems
yeah,
that were implemented July 1st, 2025, through the Surface Water Management Program.
mhm.
What's your suggestion?
Well-
Wouldn't it make sense if we did the most equitable assessment and analysis and implemented the most even-handed deal? You know, Wyoming, the University of Wyoming has some 16,000 acres in Albany County,
It's
and
nearly
217,000
of
acres
the land in the
owned
city
by
limits.
the state of Wyoming in Albany County.
Yeah.
That's all off the tax roll. None of that is there. Mike Schilt, thank you for coming to the talk shop a couple weeks ago and discussing this, bringing it to the forefront. Mike Schiltz testified November 18th in front of a revenue committee for the state of Wyoming legislature and subcommittee. They brought this forward, and it made me think about the connection to Surface Water Management Program and how residents are looking at an average of $10 and no reduction of their $10 a month fee, while thousands of dollars are being bypassed by other entities, nonprofit entities, and so forth.
Well, that's what the cap does. It takes the largest landowners and it drastically reduces the amount that they have to pay. Now, Mike Schilt did a really good job, I thought, in front of the Appropriations Committee in discussing what's called PILT, P-I-L-T, payments in lieu of taxes. This is a policy which a lot of states implement. Joe Shumway, who is still on council and is our former mayor, is also a strong advocate of this. Essentially, what PILT is that an agency which is, especially a government agency, which otherwise is exempt from taxes, will pay a certain amount of money to the municipality for services in lieu of taxes, even though it's exempt. And the philosophy behind that is, well, you know, they're receiving the services they need to be paid for, and therefore the city should receive some money for that. The legislature has never been willing to do this, and I think it really needs to consider it, especially as property tax revenue is being cut. I think it's time, and I'm hoping that as appropriations continues to meet, they will strongly consider this as a way of funding the city. But right now, really everything in terms of stormwater, everything's up in the air. No one knows what's going to happen with the lawsuits, the University of Wyoming lawsuit against the city of Laramie, the two lawsuits that are going on in Cheyenne against their stormwater utility, which they tried to do the same thing with. They tried to basically push it through without going to the voters and asking the voters to approve a financing scheme, just as Laramie did, which is arguably a violation of state law. So everything is really up in the air. But in the meantime, we could at least talk about developing a fair funding scheme and discuss the contingencies depending on how much these agencies are going to pay or not.
Are we
should be talking
repeating
about
history
this.
a third time? It seems December 4th, 2024, the vote to adopt the utility program was made. 6-3, 6 in favor, 3 against.
Yes.
And then we had this trough of the city moving forward to plan and progressively move ahead based on that vote. But not a lot of public information out in the first 3 months leading up to July 1st and an implementation where you couldn't barely find the appeal form. Almost simultaneously, the form became available. Oh, you got to click on your property, and you got to. I mean, it was confusion, on how it was going to be done, and then the bill came, and that was impact zero. That was absolute zero, and the public outcry began.
Exactly.
August 5th, they vote to pause in 2025, 120-day pause, and there was a denial to repeal. There was also an initiative on the floor to repeal, and ironically, the order of events was, who sets the agenda for how council consider items, Brett?
Well, that's usually set by council in
a prior
collaboration with staff
Yeah.
at the end of the prior meeting. So at the end of a work session, they talk about what the next meeting agenda is going to be.
That's right.
That's what I was getting. Actually, what I was getting to at the end of the work session this coming Tuesday night, they will set the agenda for the last council meeting of the year. But in any case, this is this is done out in the open, but the final agenda doesn't come out right then, and there can be changes to it. It comes out the following Friday when you only have a few days before the actual meeting, and sometimes it's a surprise. Sometimes you don't know exactly what is going to be on the agenda for the meeting because things will crop up that you didn't even hear about during the discussion.
It would be false for me to believe that that's not misleading by intent.
Well, one thing that I expressed when I was running for city council for a seat on it was that I thought that was way too late in the week. That it would give time for the public time to digest it, and also to give the news media time to report on it. The agenda should come out by Wednesday or at the very latest on Thursday. By coming out on Friday, what it did was, back when the Boomerang reported more local news, it basically cut the news cycle. The newsroom was shutting down on Friday by the time the agenda came out,
and no Monday paper.
And there was no Monday paper. So really, it kept people in the city from being informed and being able to discuss this and
stay out.
Yeah, and
we
figure
were
out
elected.
what to do. Yeah, over the weekend. And well, now we don't even have the publication that we used to have. We have this segment, and there's discussion online, but overall there's even less discussion before the meeting of what's going to be there. The public is less informed than ever before, and I think that's a shame. In any case, that agenda review period also doesn't allow for public comment. It's after
Public comment.
It's
after the final
public comment. That's right. At the in the work session. So the only way to comment is to write your council members, and if you do have comments on that, the only thing you can really do is write council@cityoflaramie.org, and hope that your message is read and understood, and maybe the council will accommodate you. But the process isn't good enough. It's not transparent enough. It's not interactive enough, in my opinion. So in any case, moving on. After the non-item about the storm and surface water utility, there's another item, which is the city manager's year-end report. Now, as most people know, our city manager, Janine Jordan, is moving on to become the city manager of Casper, Wyoming, and so she's no longer going to be here.
December 14th, final day.
Yes. So this is her swan song. This is her final report. And if you take a look at the agenda, the report isn't there. There's just a little summary which says the city council, the city manager is going to give a final report. So we don't know what she's going to say. We don't know if there are going to be slides. This is right now sort of open-ended. So the only way we're going to find out is if something is published on the website.
Did you pull this packet Friday, or did you pull the packet today? Or
I printed my copy this morning.
Yeah, so this is 24 hours. Well, tomorrow, this will come about on the agenda. Wow.
Yes, and so we don't know what's going to be said. Of course, well, there's not, but really much. The outgoing city manager.
The rule for me does not apply to thee when it comes to many issues. notification, notice, 3 minute speaking, 3 minute rebuttal.
Mhm.
There's a lot of inconsistencies that have been in
Yeah.
2025 that have been witnessed.
Yep, there are a lot of there's a lot of information which is left out of the agenda that's presented to the public, and sometimes even the packet which the city council members themselves get. Another good example is for an item which was taken off of the agenda for the last city council meeting, having to do with the franchise tax which is put on your gas bill. Your gas bill contains an item which says franchise fee, and it's really a tax fee. It's essentially a sales tax, and it is basically an amount of money that the city gets from the gas company, and this is passed through to you, which is essentially a sales tax on your utility
Your usage.
bill, right? And in this packet, the amount of this and how it's collected are set by a contract between the city and the provider. In this case, it's Black Hills Energy, the gas company. And the contracts that were shown in the agenda were an old one from the year 2000 that was signed by Mayor David Polikas and
The
brought
original.
forth by the late council member Joel Coffey. And then the new one which was being proposed for council to approve. The one that's actually in force is one that has been amended about 3 or 4 times.
And it's not shown
by council, and was never signed. Was never attached to the agenda. If you go online, you'll find the text of it. You won't see the signature. You won't see a copy of the original document, but you can find the text of it, and it's in a weird place. If you go to the municipal code on the city's website, which is not the same part of the website where you see the agendas, and you scroll down to the appendices at the very end of the municipal code, the very end of all of these city laws, there in the appendix lies the contract. This wasn't presented to council as part of the packet. It wasn't presented to the public. It wasn't referred to so the public could look it up. And so nobody could really easily compare the new proposed contract with the one that's currently in force. And they are very different. The one that was signed way back in 2000 that based the tax on the gross revenues of the gas company. The amount that they took in from you, including everything, all the fees and other things, not just the gas you bought. The one that's currently in effect only is based on the number of therms, that's a unit of heat, of gas that you bought. And actually, the one that's currently enforced is fairer. Here's why. Because with this one, with the current one, you only pay according to your usage. If you pay a meter fee, if you pay any other fees, they're not, which are constant, by the way. There's a constant meter fee for every person who gets gas service in Laramie. They don't put a tax on that, which, well, you've got to have that if you have gas at all, so it's really not fair to tax that. Also, if you do tax that as a percentage, you're shifting the burden toward the people who use less gas, because no matter how little gas they use, they still have to pay tax on that. So the current agreement, which is based on the number of therms that you consume, is much fairer, especially for people at the low end of the income scale. The new contract, which is being proposed, which is going to be proposed to council, it was taken off the agenda, went back to collecting a percentage of gross revenues, and thus was less fair. But council couldn't see that because they didn't have the current contract in front of them to compare. So yes, there's a communication problem here, and in some cases, important information is being withheld from the council and from the public, and that's a darn shame. I think we need to do better at communication here.
Brett, it's fantastic that you found the original agreement and the adjustment. The original agreement followed by the actual agreement that's in place now. The fact that you went through and actually located the text of that is phenomenal to me. It's great, and thank you. What's not phenomenal to me and seems to be uh, a habit in formation and implementation is the absence of that document signed similarly to the original 25-year-old agreement, the proposed agreement changes and the detail therein, Section 8, and to not have the current operating piece also provided is very similar to me to not having budget information included in a prep piece from city staff for city council before an important June 2023 budget meeting. How do you make great decisions on incomplete information?
Yeah, well, it's difficult, and the city, to its credit, with the new finance director, is doing a really good job of becoming more transparent. But it's still sometimes tough to go through the figures. And again, the agenda is where most people look. The agenda which is published for the city council meeting is where most people are going to look for the data they need to understand an item. And so the real problem here, I think, is that it's manipulative if the staff does not put complete information, maybe extra information, in that agenda for the public to consider, where they don't have to dig. I mean, you can now dig through the budget information more than ever before if you're willing to spend the time. But for an item like the gas franchise tax, you shouldn't have to dig to be able to look at this and say, well, which of these approaches to taxation do I think is better? How much of a rate do I think that we should have? And by the way, the
proposed increase.
Yes, that's just it. The proposed contract was going to tax gas more heavily than the one from back in 2000, even though there was no justification for the increase. The tax was 25% higher.
And we were very clear in our prior coverage of this topic, Brett. We were very clear that this was only the franchise fee that was increasing 25%. The proposed change, so the mathematics of this is your original amount of 2% minus the change of the proposed change, the new amount, old minus new in your numerator is 0.5%.
Divided by
the old
is 25%
is
25%
increase.
That's right. It doesn't mean
the math of it.
Yes, you're not paying 25% tax on your gas.
So the only
but you're paying 25% more tax.
The only misleading piece that we did, Brett, was we followed algebra, and we presented that factually. Yeah. And that was deemed on social media as misleading to some. Well, multiple choice math problems are sometimes misleading to many people, myself included. You can get caught up in the weeds. But there's no question that this was exclusively the franchise fee and not your utilities overall. But I would say, without a doubt, you can expect your utilities are all going up.
Yeah, and I've got one of my bills right here. And here's a copy of the bill. And right now, with the current contract, the one that's in force today, not the one that they're proposing to institute next July, the percentage tax that I'm paying on the gas that I receive is actually 1.8% with the fixed rate per therm. And so going up to going up to 2.5% is a big increase. And this is for a pretty typical sized house.
If you miss the mark on Earth in trajectory towards the moon by 1 millimeter at planet Earth, how far do you miss the moon in travel to the moon across that distance?
That's a good question, and I don't know if I could you could calculate the answer just from what you said.
Just theoretically, you miss the mark, don't you? Because a millimeter here is much larger the farther that you go away from Earth.
Yeah, well, missing. When the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock, Massachusetts, long ago on Thanksgiving, and I was talking about this with someone just last week at the Thanksgiving dinner table, they were headed for New York, and they just got blown a little bit off course, and they wound up landing in Massachusetts and almost starving. It can matter a tremendous amount if you miss by even a little.
Yeah. This is the City Council agenda preview with Brett Glass. Any final items on the agenda before we go to a segment on analysis?
Okay, well, that's really it. At the after the public comment on the city manager's year-end report, there will be comments from City Council about their interactions with boards and commissions, and then a review of the agenda. And then there is one other thing to consider, which isn't on this agenda but is worth knowing, which is that on Tuesday, on Christmas Eve.
It'll be canceled, okay?
Actually, no. It's going to be rescheduled.
Okay.
It's going to be rescheduled for the 18th on a Thursday. And the agenda for that hasn't been published yet, obviously, because again, they only come out the previous Friday. But whatever they were going to do on the 23rd, they're going to do on the 18th instead.
Brett Glass with your City Council agenda preview for December. What is this, 10th? The week of?
Well,
What's today, the 8th?
Yeah, today's the 8th.
Oh my gosh, how fast this year's gone.
It is, yes, it is.
It'll go fast for you too if you attend every Tuesday night in the 6 o'clock hour, your City Council agenda and the items on it. Consent, public comment, and more excitement for all of us. Brett, any final comments before we end this segment?
No, that's it, everybody. I hope everyone is enduring the cold weather and has good plans for Christmas.
We appreciate your time, everybody. Be safe out there, and we return you to 93.5 FM, Laramie's home for the holidays.